Coming up to the next general elections, politicians on both sides of the divide are offering money. They're offering us a new future. There's so much on offer. And I think it might get quite bewildering. One thinks, are promises going to actually be delivered? I mean, that's one question I think that voters can legitimately ask. But there's also this other troubling thing of cash and stuff actually being handed out. What's your own position on this kind of populist politics or populist practice in politics?
Okay, that's not an easy question. I mean, I think this question you can have a 5-day seminar, and you might not have an answer. But I think what is important to know is that governments need to work based on policies. I think this is quite important. Governments have a mandate, and policies come together as part of that mandate. So when a government uses, when parliament is dissolved, or when you have by-election, and when a government openly bribes people, I think that is really a violation of the elections rules and regulations.
Okay, let's talk about by-elections. In this very handy collection of analysis of by-elections that have happened since the 2008 general elections, the Hulu Selangor by-election is recorded here. Both sides handed out cash, to societies or schools. There were promises to one Chinese school was promised 3 million ringgit if the Barisan Nasional was brought back to power. But you are a member of the DAP and it's part of the coalition, the Pakatan Rakyat. They too practice that kind of politics. There were promises and there were handouts. Now, with both sides playing this game, is it because that is part of our political culture that's just become, it's so ingrained that whatever your principles might be, you still have to do this?
The two parts to your, in response to your question, there are two parts of an answer to an answer. Though. One, it involves the Elections Commission. The other involves the practice and the culture of politics in Malaysia, especially going towards an election, whether it's general elections or it is a by-election. If we have an independent Elections Commission, which can conduct an elections in a free and fair manner and a clean fashion, then we will not have this problem. Like in the case of India, where the Indian Elections Commission is taken seriously, and it plays a very independent role. And it is not side with the government, nor does it side with the opposition. It plays a very independent role.
So it's a regulator, it's an enforcer, and it keeps everybody in check.
In check. So you have rules that governs the elections. In Malaysia, we do have rules that governs elections, but unfortunately, when it comes to the ruling government, in this case Barisan, the rules are bent. And because the Elections Commission is seen as part or an annex of the government, there is no faith in the institution. So if the institution can play its regulatory work, its independent regulatory work to ensure a free and fair elections, then this political culture will begin to change.
But what happened under the Pakatan Rakyat government in Selangor? They play the same game. Now, what was happening there? I mean, clearly...
No. What I'm saying is I agree with you that there's a tendency for people to give land, give money to schools. That is true. But that is why I'm saying there's a need for an independent Elections Commission that goes by rules and regulations, and everybody agrees to it.
Okay. What about on the part of Malaysian voters? I mean, you've been a politician for some time now. You interact with ordinary Malaysians in their daily lives in terms of the kind of issues that crop up for them from time to time. What are their expectations? Do they expect handouts?
Well, it all depends on the group that we're talking to. It depends on the class makeup of groups. I think generally the bourgeoisie, the upper middle classes, the middle classes, and to some extent the lower classes are quite clear. We want to vote based on policies of governments, of political parties, and that's how we're going to make our decision about the way we cast our vote. So that group of people are quite fine in terms of policies. But then you also have a large group of people who feel that, when elections come, when I can get money from a particular group, that helps me to choose that party over the other parties. So these are people who are generally vulnerable, people who have been used to be bribed, and people who are part of a network, who are given money or sometimes fear as well, in order to vote a certain political party.
Right. So that has a direct and immediate effect on their voting behavior.
Yeah.
But aren't policies also sometimes constructed with the interest of particular segments of society? For instance, a policy that's come out from the coalition, the Pakatan Rakyat, for cheaper cars, basically. Isn't that something that appeals to the middle classes in Malaysia? Is that a form of bribery? If you say we could have cheaper cars?
Let us backtrack though, and answer an important question though. I think if a policy is put forward in terms of a 4-year policy, though, that means you want to restructure society or you want to support vulnerable groups. So that policy means that, say, support for single mothers or, for example, free water in Selangor. That practice started already in 2008. So 2008, you carry on till now. So that policy is not considered bribing because it is part of government policy and it is not one-off though. It's not one-off. Whereas if you look at BRIM 1.0 or 2.0, these are one-off projects which are given with the sole purpose of trying to win the support of the lower middle classes who might sway towards a certain political party because they have a sense of loyalty as they have taken the money from
a sense of obligation.
Obligation and loyalty. Okay? So what we should be looking at is the difference between policies and this one-off giving out of money. And this is where the Elections Commission, in my view, has to play a role. The Elections Commission has to say, regardless if it's a by-election or general election, no money should be dispensed off, no hampers should be dispensed off, no rice or no goodies should be given to anybody during this time of elections. And if you're going to give something, you clear it with the Elections Commission first. Because sometimes it's part of government policy, like welfare for people. Welfare for people. That is something the government does almost on a daily basis. So that can be given. But it cannot be a one-off that is just constructed, given to people during the time of elections to win.
But do you think your coalition will be able to resist this tendency that we seem to have to give away things during elections?
It is challenging, I must admit. It is challenging. But the right thing to do would be to keep away from that.
I want to come back to the question of the voter. Now, what percentage of voters do you think are in this category of kind of vulnerable, people whose monthly incomes are so minuscule that they are swayed by a cash handout? I mean, if we look at some of the wages that people earn, I mean, they might be earning 600 ringgit. We had a recent protest by Proton workers. Yeah. They're earning 600 ringgit. If you give them 500 ringgit, that's a month's bonus, basically. Yeah. In terms of the voter population and demographic, how significant are they? Could they actually turn an election? Could they be the deciding vote for an election in a state like Selangor?
No, I think in a highly competitive environment or highly competitive elections like in the one that we're going to face, those voters will play an important role. There's no doubts about that. And, it's quite obvious when people come to me and say, hey, I just got some money from this party. How come you're not giving us anything? It's right to my face. So I'm quite clear. I'll say, listen, my position and my party's position is very clear. That there's no money, no support for you just because an election is coming. No. You vote for us because of what we have done the last 4 years and what we can promise you for the next 4 years. That's what elections are supposed to be. But as you point out, people too have their own culture. And it's also a survival culture as well, because they know that this is a time to reap. This is a time to make money, though. So they go to everybody they know and they say, hey, look, elections are coming. Why are you so quiet, though? People come to you. People come to you and tell you, hey, why are you so quiet? How come that guy gives me a T-shirt? You don't do anything, though. So I tell them, I got no money to buy you a T-shirt. Neither can I give you a free T-shirt. But if you want to vote for somebody, you vote based on what we have done for the last 4 years and what we promise to do the next 4 years or 5 years. So I think this is going to take some time. So the change must come throughout the process. People have to change and say that, look, this is not good for democracy in Malaysia. It's not good for their families. It is not good for society if they take money and vote based on whoever is giving them money. And then political parties also need to shape up, and they have to say, look, we are not going to bribe people, and this is legally wrong and morally wrong. And you have an elections commission that has to put the foot down and say, if you give money, if you give land, if you do this during elections, bribe schools and so on, when you give Chinese schools or in-Tamil schools or Sekolah Agama, it's bribing the different communities, we will come very hard on you. So the change must take place throughout the system. So I think if that doesn't happen, I think it's going to be difficult. I think the ball must roll from the elections commission, starting in this coming election, to say, this is what we want. No money should be offered as soon as Parliament is dissolved. If anybody is seen giving money, giving land, just with the purpose of winning votes, we will come very hard. I think this is something that has to be done. If India can do it, if other countries can do it, I don't see why the Malaysian Election Commission cannot do it. I mean, I think this is a question that everybody is asking now. So I completely agree with you. One, there's a need for a change in the culture, people's culture, because people know elections comes once in 5 years. This is the time to milk the system, though. So that's one group that is doing it. That's number one. Number two, political parties are also aware that this is the time to go all out, though. Okay? And number three, you need an independent regulator who needs to say, this has to stop, and it stops now, though. I think the change must take place in all these areas, though.
In some ways, political parties have to construct policies or offer policies that deal with very different segments. Business community with perhaps wants tax breaks or wants incentives to run their businesses. Middle classes who want opportunity to spend more of their money on things that they think are important, education and whatnot. And the working class that perhaps wants support because, on a daily level they're having a hard time. How do political parties aggregate those demands? And how do you avoid going for the lowest common denominator type of policies in a situation like that when you have development so unevenly
I think
uneven across the board?
The answer to the question would be a challenge that all governments face, though, and a question that Adam Smith had raised in 1776. Why are some nations poor and why are some nations rich? And the answer to that question is quite simple. Nations that create wealth, nations that are organized to create wealth do very well, and nations that do not suffer. And subsequently, you have people like other economists who have said, yes, one is fine, you create wealth, but how do you distribute that wealth? Keynesian question would be, how do you distribute that wealth? The Marxian question would be, Karl Marx's question would be, whether there is equitable distribution of wealth between the poor and the rich. So I think the question that we are facing is that, though. One of the problems that we have today is the issue of economic disparity between the rich and the poor, which is staggering and which is getting worse. The gap is getting very, very big. And therefore you create, disparities, a large pool of disparities and so on and so forth. Even in the question of minimum wages, we are unable to effectively implement it. That has to become a major controversy right now. So really, the issue for any government, whether they're state government or the federal government, is to ensure that wealth is being created and that wealth is effectively and efficiently distributed among the different classes in society.
I just want to stop you there. My impression of both the coalitions is they try very hard to project themselves as business friendly, pro-business. That seems to be one hand, that seems one image. The other is they all also want to give handouts to everybody. They also want to appeal to the broad majority of people by, alleviating that situation. We talk about welfare and stuff. There seems to be some sort of contradiction between this, this pro-business stance and a kind of populist kind of stance.
No, actually, I don't think. I think there's a lot of similarities if you look at it. I'll show you why the similarities are and why there are problems attached to this, though. The similarity is the model is the same. The model is the same.
For both the coalitions?
Yeah, very similar. Except that the model of economic development is the same. The model of wealth creation is also same. The difference that between both the coalition is that one coalition believes that you take the money and you pass it to cronies. This is a big difference. For example,
to cronies.
Yeah.
Okay.
So that means, you have a MRT project, it goes to cronies. If you have, for example, a cow rearing industry that you want to promote, it goes to cronies. Whereas the other coalition believes that the revenue of the state must go back to people. This is the difference. The model in which you create the wealth, which I just pointed out, is the same.
And
So
is that a problem? Should the
No.
model be different?
No, but the model of distribution is different.
Okay.
That's what I'm saying. So the way you create the wealth is the same, but the way you distribute it is very different. So one says only a certain group of people will benefit, but the other model, the Pakistan right model, is very clear. In the case of Selangor, where the revenue of the state goes back to the people of the state. So that comes through a variety of projects, namely free water, support for single mothers, university students get 1,000 ringgit. For example, if somebody passes away after 60 years of age, you get 2,500 ringgit. You have home shopping for the elderly people who are above 60, who'll be given, especially those who are poor, will be given $100 to do their shopping in a month, and so on and so forth. And then if you're born in the state of Selangor, you're given 100 ringgit as part of some insurance scheme, which you can, cash out when you're 18 years old for education and so on and so forth. If you go to university, you're given 100 ringgit, 1,000 ringgit.
Is that buying loyalty?
No, but that's part of state policy. Why is it a state policy? Because it is not introduced the day before elections or the month before elections. It was introduced as part of an overall policy to provide welfare for people and also to bring about restructuring of society. So, for example, there is a program for rural women to come out of poverty, for example. To come out of poverty. So that program targets not single women, but women in general, to come out of poverty. There's another program that targets small and medium industries, not the huge ones, the very small ones which need support. So you get an interest-free 5,000 ringgit loan from the state. It's interest-free, but you have to pay back, but it's interest-free. So there's a difference between the first model, which says, yes, the government has money, the state has money, but the money will only be channeled through cronies and proxies.
Well, can I, very kind of quick last question. The Barisan National has ruled this country since independence in two forms, Alliance and now with the Barisan, and a huge middle class has grown. They might argue that despite the criticisms about cronyism, that they have overseen a you can call it trickle down. You can talk about a progressive policies that have actually grown a middle class. I mean, can one actually criticize them on that level? Didn't they also oversee the creation of a middle class?
Yes, you're right. I mean, it must be fairly pointed out that the Barisan National has a tremendous impact and has brought tremendous development to the country. There's no doubts about that. But today, the middle class is leveraged. You talk to any member of the middle class today, he or she will tell you, I have a debt for 30,000, I have debt for 25,000, or 100,000, or 200,000, or 300,000. We are living on debt. And that is the biggest problem facing the middle class today. The middle class is what we want is being squeezed out right now, though, because they are really from hand to mouth. And they cannot afford, this bubbling. I think today the middle class can't buy houses, simple as that. If you are young and you just get married, if you get married next year, this year, or even last year, you will not be able to buy a home. Simply not possible, though. So one, you're living on debt. You're living on debt. You're renting your house, for example, and you're highly leveraged. So therefore, this development is not, in that sense, how do I say this? The true development of sorts, where you are financially stable, though. But you are only stable because you borrowed money from somewhere else. And if that is cut off, you are in trouble, though. I think, and also number two, this system has become very crisis prone. So in that sense, Barisan's cycle of development has come to an end, and they're going in circles right now. So therefore, there's a need for new way of doing things, or new ways of doing different things, though. And that is where Pakistan comes in. Where Pakistan can say that we cannot concentrate capital in the hands of few people, but we need to redistribute wealth among everybody so that there is a need to re-energize the economy. I think these are fundamental differences in the way one has to look at the way the economy is organized. Point again simply being the model is the same, meaning the way they make the money is the same, the wealth creation is the same, but it is a distribution question that is now being fought out. That's why the issues of corruption, governance, transparency becomes a big issue. Otherwise, they will not become an issue. But for Pakistan, right, this is important. What belongs to the state goes back to people. And that's one of the big differences that we have. And coming back to your last question on the middle class, yes, you have a middle class, but you have a highly leveraged middle class. And today, if they lose jobs, they'll become very poor. I think this is where the problem lies. And this is where the crisis of the country also lies. It is unsustainable, that's what I'm saying. That's what I wanted to say. The development that was brought by Barisan, tremendous, unsustainable. But unsustainable. So we need to have a sustainable form of economic development.
Okay, thank you very much.